don't really know who I am, this is just my website, which is why I brought it up. I was Cameron introduced me. I was president of Game Dev Club 3 years ago now. Is when that was, which is a long time. So I'm super old. I now just do like boring software stuff, but I still make games. These are some games on screen that I made while I was in Game Dev Club. This is the last one I made exactly 3 years ago at my last jam ever of Game Dev Club, which is our first jam we ever did in the fall, I think. So it's, look at that tradition has been going on. And these are some games I made afterwards. This is a game I made the most recent Ludum Dare game jam. It's an online game jam. That did pretty okay in the rankings. And so I like making games. I like Game Dev Club. I love what's going on here. So I come back every once in a while to talk about Juice. And to do that, I'm actually going to realize this is probably annoying. I'm going to stop streaming and restream a specific window. All right. And then I'm also going to share, so this is a new part of the presentation. There are a couple of new parts of this presentation. One of the new parts is that I'm going to share the URL in general right now. So that is a URL to the slide deck. You can press enter to go forward and press backspace to go back and F10 to toggle full screen. And there's a little slide counter up in the corner. So if you want to, spoiler alert, this presentation is interactive. If you want to interact with the presentation itself and see what's going on in it, you can open that up in another tab in another window, and you should be able to see what is going on there as well. It can kind of help to touch, like put your hands on it, and hopefully you'll kind of see what that means in a second. But yeah, I'm going to talk about Juice, and I'll explain exactly what that means. I'm Andrew Murray. I already introduced myself. And so I will go ahead and get this started. I guess final entry note here is that this talk works best interactive. Like, I've been working on this talk for like 4 years, and I just have so many examples and things to talk about. Then this is my favorite subject. I love talking about it. A lot of them are not on the slides, and ask a question, I will probably have like an example and a whole rant about some game that does it well or doesn't do it well or something like that. So I will, please just like unmute and yell over me and say, hey, you're forgetting to talk about this, or why didn't you talk about this, or what the hell does that mean, or whatever. Cool. So any further ado, I'll start talking about Juice. This is a game I made for this presentation. And if you are following along in browser, you should be able to hit enter and go ahead and play this game. The instructions are in the bottom corner. And in this game, enemies fall down from the top of the screen. When they fall to the bottom, they come back out the top. You can jump, you can shoot, and when you've shot an enemy, I think it's 7 times, they die. And this is it. This is a complete game, right? And the idea here is that this is sort of like maybe a game you would make during like a game dev tutorial or something. Maybe you guys have made a game like this, because I know you run tutorials every quarter. Maybe you ran a tutorial this quarter and you made a game like this, or like something else. I haven't put any art in this game yet. There aren't any real objectives, but I could pretty easily add a store counter and call it complete. So it is generally what I would call a complete game. But my argument is that without adding any new features, without adding any art, without adding any sound effects, there's still a ton of work to do here on this game. And what the work to do is juice, or game feel, right? So these are these two bucket terms that are used a lot in the game industry. And like I say, the honestly, they don't really mean anything. They just mean making a game feel better, right? It's kind of something you can talk about where it's like, hey, this could maybe use some more game feel, or like, hey, you should probably juice this interaction. People say things like that all the time. And it's just very like make the game feel better, and it's like very intangible what that means. But hopefully today, I'll be able to like add a bit more tangibility to that. So the idea is to give a bunch of tiny tips and tricks that help make the game feel better. But beyond just these tiny tips and tricks, I want to like apply a lot of it back to like theory, actual research that's been done, tried and true principles, and talk about a lot of terminology that's often used to describe these things. So that later, if you're talking to another game developer and you use one of these terms, or if they use one of these terms, you'll know what they mean, or they'll know what you mean, because these are just kind of what people say when they talk about this kind of thing. Some non-goals, some things I'm not trying to do today. I'm not trying to give specific programming advice for a specific engineering language. There are no code on these slides. This is not something that's for Unity or for Game Maker or for anything like that. This is just very specific, very generally how to make a game feel better. And it's also not, and it's not programming specific either. Like all disciplines, and I'll talk about this a little bit later as well on some of the examples, but all disciplines need to be aware of this. If you're an artist, if you're a composer, if you are doing sound design, or if you're a programmer, or if you're just doing game design, like you need to know about these kind of things. They really are kind of like the bread and butter of making things feel better. And yeah, so it's not, don't tune out now being like, oh, this is going to be, I saw, kind of a prototype game. This is going to be a coding talk. There is no code in this talk. It's just about design. Finally, I don't want to give advice about just action games. I am going to be adding juice to an action game. But like I said, I'm going to try to tie everything back to these core principles, things that have actually been researched, etc. And so hopefully this applies to any game. You can see how it would apply to anything. And I'll try to talk about how it could apply to things that look different from time to time in the presentation as well. This is a little slide heavy at the beginning, sorry. But before I get really into it, any questions about what we're looking at today or what's going on? All right. I will.
Void of online Discord presentations, Andrew.
I know, right?
It's the silence.
I'm used to it. I'm a team lead at work, so my whole job is being like, does anyone have a problem with that? And then waiting for forever. Cool. I'm gonna dig into it. Please unmute and just say whatever you want at any point during this presentation. That will make it a lot more fun. Cool. There are two major sections I'm going to go through when I'm talking about these little things to do to juice the game. First, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things related to the principles of animation. And second, I'm going to talk about things related to interaction and reaction design. Oh, also, sorry, I just saw Secureth posting in the No Mic channel. I'm also reading that, so I will see things in there as well. And or Secureth can yell them at me. Cool. Perfect. So first I'm going to talk about stuff with the animation principles. So there are 12 principles of animation. These come from a famous book that was written by Disney animators in the 80s. And they are all sorts of things that those guys thought that were super important to making characters feel alive. The book is called like The Illusion of Life or something like that. And it's really it's really interesting because what they called alive isn't always realistic. It's often an exaggeration of reality. One of these principles you can see in the bottom corner is literally exaggeration. And so it's sort of like the idea of like, how can we show more than reality in order to really impress upon people in an animation what things look like, right? And they were obviously Disney in the age, right? They'd been for 50 years doing hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation. But my concept is that a lot of these, specifically these ones, really apply to games really well, really cleanly as well. The ones I didn't include, timing and motion has to do a bit with frame rate. I'm going to assume we have fixed frame rate. because games often do. Staging has to do staging, and the other 3 on the bottom, these kind of like other 4 that aren't highlighted, all have to do more with like actual drawing. And that is important for games. I'm not gonna say it's not important for games. But like I said, we're not going to add any art to this game. We're not going to like do any of that kind of stuff. We are just going to deal with how the game plays. And so the rest of these, you can kind of see just from glancing at them, all have to do with just kind of an object as it moves around, and how that object should kind of look as it's moving around, the rules it should follow as it's moving around. And I'll go into each of these in a bit more depth as we're going through and adding things to the game. All right, so now I'm back at the game. And so this is iteration 0. Like I said, this is a complete game. There's nothing wrong with it. Besides, it's not very fun, right? So let's go ahead and try to make this a bit more fun. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add more force, more gravity. This is always the first thing I do when I'm adding juice to a game. So what you can see is when I'm jumping here. So in the old jump is kind of like this. It's very floaty. It doesn't feel decisive. This jump, there's just like a sudden reaction. I press my jump button and suddenly I'm moving a lot faster than I was in the old one. And I also there's more gravity to compensate. The total jump height is a little bit lower, I think. But it I feel like I hang at the top for a lot longer. And what that basically is that's the animation principle slow in, slow out. And what it's saying here is that when you're moving fast, you should be moving fast. And when you're moving slow, you should move very slow, right? Pull away from the idea of just kind of this half and half slow moving around, and move more into speeding towards your destination and then hanging there for longer. And this doesn't just apply to game physics, right? It kind of clearly applies here where it's I'm at the ground and then I quickly get up to the top, the next important area when I'm at the top. It also applies to just movement in general in games. So here's an example with a menu. The first thing here over on the left is starts fast but isn't smooth. So these graphs are position over time. You kind of see how that works in a second. But the first one, as I click my up and down arrows, it just instantly blips to the area that it's supposed to go. There is a really good thing about this. It's very responsive, but it's also very boring, right? It doesn't feel lifelike. It feels like a menu. And there's times when this is the right thing to do, but for the sake of this presentation, we're going to make this feel more lively, right? So the next idea is, okay, this should be smooth, right? And so I kind of have this linear line of over time, just slide it from one area to another. And that starts to feel a bit more alive, right? That white box is a persistent object now. It doesn't delete and reappear somewhere else. It actually slides to its new location. But we've lost something here. We've lost kind of the snappiness. So this third one is it starts fast and then kind of slows down, right? The same way we were talking about that jump. And that one suddenly is starting to feel a lot more alive. It feels like it hops towards the area where it's supposed to be a lot faster and then slides into place, which is a lot more compelling. It gets that fast reaction to what you're doing back, but it also slides and makes it feel alive, and curves in general just feel better. The last one here adds exaggeration, which is another one of the principles of animation, and it actually overshoots where it's going and has to come back at the end. Obviously there's a time and place for this. I love it. I think it's great. And my wheelhouse is chunky action games. And so I love doing things like this. It's maybe if you're making something very serious, it's maybe not the place, but to illustrate the principle, right? This is you could go even further, add exaggeration. And that just really makes that little white box feel so much more alive than it already is, just sliding around. Next, kind of a note about that, one of the other animation principles is anticipation. Anticipation is the idea that you can see in the left example here. So this button is like a jump button. and when it flashes, that's the user precedent. So one of the principles is animation, right? Because I did say slow in, slow out, right? But I really only kind of showed you slow out. And that's because things reacting quickly to your action in a game is super important. And so it's just something to be careful of. A lot of games do things like this. A really specific example of a game I remember playing and being like, why is this game so sluggish and weird, is, I don't know if I remember, it's the game show Wipeout, but there was a Wipeout game on the Wii, which was like not a great game. But like that one had like you pressed a button and then you watched an animation happen and then the action happened a lot later. And it just felt sluggish and bad, and it was a terrible game. It was pretty fun, but it was a terrible game. And versus this kind of like, this isn't realistic what's happening on the right, but it does feel a little bit better to hop as soon as you kind of press this button. So anticipation is important, and it's important in games. Sometimes when you have a character like draw back before they attack someone with a sword or something like that, you can do a lot of cool stuff with anticipation there.
There's, you said done, then we can unmute and jump in. I have a comment. So for a jump specifically, another option is you could have the anticipation happen when you press down the button and have the actual jump happen when you release the button. It's a little awkward that like jumping happens on release. Like most games don't do that, but
right.
But it does allow you to have that full, like, kind of best of both worlds, where you get to have the anticipation, and also it can make some intuitive sense of like you jump, like you do have control of when the jump happens.
Yeah, a super good example of something like that is that I've been playing recently is Paper Mario: The Origami King. And in that game, when you have a button that just throws confetti, and it's one of like the features in the game. And when you hold down the button, Mario's just there holding it until you let go, and you gotta control how long that takes. And it just feels so fun. And I'm always messing around with that as I'm like throwing confetti, just because it is like really fun to like be able to control the anticipation yourself. I do think what you said about jumps though is jumps are tricky. It's right, because there's so much idiomatic about how jumps work in like a platform game specifically, right? That like, and this is becoming more specific than I want to be in this talk, but like that, yeah, it's always almost weird to have that like hold button for anticipation. But yeah, super good point. Cool. I'm gonna move on to the next iteration of the game. We're up to slide 12 if you're following at home. The next thing is a pretty direct application of a animation principle. It's squash and stretch. So as I'm jumping upward now, I am stretched, and I'm more vertical. As I'm falling, I'm squashed. I'm more horizontal. The enemies do it too. You can see as they're falling off. And that's just sort of like kind of like the next thing we've added here. So one cool thing that happens because of this, and this is again just part of things feeling more alive, etc. One cool thing that happens is it emphasizes which direction the player is moving in the air. So like as if you glance at one area of the screen and you see something skinny, you know it's moving up. And if you see it's fat, you know it's moving down. And that can help things read a lot just at a glance. And it also like is like, it just feels more alive. It's more fluid. It's less rigid. And all of that is just part of those animation principles. And one thing I was about to mention, and Namit actually mentioned it in Discord, which is perfect. They said that Overwatch does this a lot, just maybe that it jumps and a few other animations. And that's true, because essentially, like I was about to say, is that like this makes sense for a cube, but you might be thinking like, my game's not about cubes. Why would I do this? You can totally toss this on top of other animations. That Ghost Badminton game I showed earlier, like it has normal animations, but it also like stretches those animations. You can throw it on top of 3D models as well. And you can also, if you don't want the actual literal squashing and stretching over your animations, you can just decide to design your animations in this way, right? For example, for a platformer, where like if your character brings their arms in towards their chest and lifts their head up and kind of kicks a leg out while they're jumping upwards, and they look really skinny, versus letting their arms fly out, maybe they have a cloak that's flowing, things like that. When they're falling, they look a lot fatter. That sort of thing like emphasizes this in the same way, in kind of like a more natural way. Or you can do what kind of these games that people are mentioning in chat do, and like combine both of them, right? They have an animation that emphasizes that principle, and they also apply the programmatic thing on top of that. As far as the actual programmatics of this is the mathiest this presentation will get. But basically just like this is the formula. It's very easy. You really do just like add some fraction of the vertical speed to the width and subtract some fraction of the vertical speed from the height. It's just that easy.
Do you have like a motion blur on that, or is it just my screen?
It is probably just your screen.
Okay.
It's going fast in 60 frames, and if you're watching the stream, it's over the stream too. So it can it's like there's really high contrast between these colors too, which also makes it look more like that. Because it's like easier to see the after images on like high contrast things.
Although a motion blur, I believe, would constitute as more juice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks cool either way.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to the next one. These are some really good smear frames in chat, by the way, if people are following on the no mic. Anyway, sorry. The next iteration here is I'm skewing the sprite, so this is more fun smearing stuff. I'm now skewing the sprite while running. So the top of the sprite kind of lags behind the bottom. It's happening on the enemies as well. And I actually added a little bit. You can kind of see as I stop here, I kind of like added a little bit of that exaggeration I was talking about before, where I kind of like the top jerks past where the bottom was. And this is just a little bit more to make things feel a little bit more alive. It's the animation principle for this one is follow through. Basically, it's like you have something following it. A really good example of doing this, I'm like leaning into the cube aesthetic really hard here now, but the classic example of this without a cube is Banjo-Kazooie, right? Or Jak and Daxter. Both do the same thing where you have a companion character that rides on your shoulder, and they give you this big trail behind you that sort of does this like mocking animation of what you just did that emphasizes the action you just took, and then some, right? And kind of gives you this over exaggeration on everything you're doing. So that's a really good way of doing it once you have more and thinking about those kind of things. Adding just like a trail behind your character, even if it's for no reason, just like looks nice a lot of the time. A lot of 2D games add like little trails behind the characters. So that's the skew. Next one, shooting spawns shells. So I now have these little shells coming out of the back of me every time I shoot. This is secondary action, is the animation principle. So basically, like when an action that's powerful occurs, then like there should be some secondary action, some other thing that happens because of it. And that is like what's happening here, right? Shooting is a big deal. When it happens, somebody can kick out the back as well. But there's still a lot of things that don't have these sort of secondary actions or don't have some sort of effect or emphasis on them happening. And that's what I want to dig into more with the second section of this presentation, which is design for interactions and reactions. So as a rule of thumb, I like to say that intensity should be inversely proportional to frequency. And then because frequency is kind of like a reverse proxy for importance, is what I would say. what does that mean? Well, let's look at all the interactions we have. This is a very simple game, so it only has 4 interactions. But the most common interaction that's happening is player creating a bullet. That happens all the time. Every time you press the X button, you just bam, 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 you're creating bullets. That's kind of the one we were adding a little bit more juice to in the last iteration. But less common and more important than that is a bullet hitting an enemy. And then even less common than that, but even more important, is a bullet killing an enemy. And the least common and most important interaction is an enemy killing a player. And so the idea is that we'll add more and more and more emphasis on these as we get towards the bottom of this list. And that will sort of like make this feel good by emphasizing the things that are really important and giving them a lot of juice. Also, I think I'm getting a little bit of echo of myself picked up on someone's mic. Just a heads up. It's not a lot, so it's not a big deal, but cool. So the next thing I'm doing is adding bigger, faster bullets. These bullets aren't realistic. They're just these big white things. But they feel a lot more powerful, right? And a lot of this has to do with the same concepts we were talking about on the animations curve slide, right? With that preferring a fast start. It gives more feedback, right? There's a reaction to a player action. It's harder to miss what pressing the button did. It doesn't create this small, slow little black pellet. It actually creates a big white thing. Why white? White catches the eye more. It, like, the human eye, like, is more attracted to something that has a brighter color. And so and I added like some green too to give it like a border. Like it's more of a big deal when you press that button now. It adds some emphasis to that. And it makes more sense why there's shells shooting out behind me too, right? Like these bullets now look like they have enough power to like cause the shell to like kick out at the rate that it is. So as a result of this, one other thing we can do that's totally not animation principle focused is like make gameplay adjustments based on this. So like I've made the enemies weaker, right? So like bullets take them out faster because the bullets are more powerful. And so like that I've actually like now stepped away from gameplay and actually like stepped away from animation and made a gameplay impact because of the animation and because of like how powerful this thing feels. It now literally is more powerful. And that's another way of like juicing it up, right? Like these bullets are more powerful now. That feels better. It also increases, by making there be more enemies, it increases the number of like fun interactions. Like killing an enemy is fun. Like that is like what we're here for this game. So like, yeah, it's like super sick to like be able to do that more, right? Than before I was like clicking my button 7 times before I could take anyone out. That was like just kind of frustrating. The next one is screen shake, the classic. I literally just took that list of 4 actions that we talked about before and had it increase the amount of screen shake as we did each one. So there's a little bit when you shoot bullets. When you shoot bullets, a little bit more when you hit an enemy, and even more when they die. Pretty simple application of what we're talking about there. I love lots of screen shake. Again, chunky action games are my wheelhouse. So I added a lot for this game, and I think it makes this game feel really fun. It makes you really feel like you're shooting when you're shooting. And hitting feels even more powerful. The next thing is kickback. So now this is kind of another application of that hierarchy. So every time I press or I shoot now, I get kind of knocked back a little bit. It makes me go a little bit slower as I'm moving forward. And these enemies now get knocked as well, even more, right? Again, hitting an enemy is more impactful than hitting, like, shooting, right? So the enemies get knocked back a whole bunch, which makes sense. And there's also kind of like some like cool stuff going here where I can shoot them over like to this other part now. There's enemies couldn't get there before, and like now they can get there, which is really interesting because like now the player, right, it's like that, not just animation, but the player in fact has more control over the world, right? I can feel like I've caused something to happen in this game that wasn't supposed to happen or wouldn't have happened without me being here, right? And that's part of like a game feeling good, right? Is like that kind of action. Last thing is cool death. So now when you shoot an enemy, they drop some of these chunks, and when you kill them, they drop a whole bunch of chunks. And when you die, like I said, I hadn't actually added that till just now, but like I said, right, that could be, you can do so much juice there, like totally take control away from the player and just make him watch his animation. It's short, it doesn't take time, and it really just like on the old one, it's like when I hit an enemy, I'm still walking forward and I just messed up my next run, right? Whereas on this one, it's like it gives me a second to take a breath between, just a second, right, to take a breath between attempts, and it feels good. It emphasizes that a lot. And this just generally is like, it's more exciting to kind of like have more things happening on these more important interactions. Two things that are happening here that I want to highlight, terminology wise, is permanence, which is the idea that things stick around afterwards, right? This is like kind of like a bigger game topic, right? But like these chunks like stay on the ground here, and it's like I can go around and do something else, and then I come back, I'm like, oh hey, yeah, remember when I like killed the guy there, right? And it's like that's really exciting to like be able to do that, and like games can use that really well. A masterclass in permanence is Hotline Miami, which is a really difficult game, but at the end of every level, you walk back past through all the levels, you kind of remember how you did them before, because you like see everywhere that you were able to kill an enemy and kind of like how you killed them almost, and it feels really like exciting and powerful. The other thing is there's some emergent gameplay going on here, which emergent gameplay is literally just any new behavior as a result to existing systems. So some things I want to talk about is like, this actually was added in an earlier iteration, but like the kickback causes me to like, I don't know if you can see that, but like actually wiggle with the sprite skew when I'm not moving, which like is just like, that's just how my character works. Like, and I didn't have to program that. Like I programmed something kind of generic when I was programming like how to like make the character skew at all, and it automatically started happening, and it's just like, it's emergent, right? It just comes up on its own. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is the chunks fall through the screen just like the enemies do. That just makes it feel like the world's more real, right? It's like, oh, that's how the world works, right? Even though those are just there for effect, like, again, it's not something I programmed, but because that's the way the world works, it adds things in. So like taking the extra time to like make things in a way such that like these systems interact, like, is awesome. Players eat that shit up. Everyone loves it. Like, this is why everyone loves Breath of the Wild, is because it like feels like you actually have full control over like the world and the systems, because it gives you a few fully explained systems and then just kind of like lets you play with them, right? It's very sandboxy, but it's even really important for games that like aren't very sandboxy at all. Also, sorry, I saw I missed a message in here. Shine said, too much screen shake will cause the player to lose precision, and that is true. This amount that I've added here is definitely a lot. A lot of games let you turn it down. You can also do like, this is very like chunky, blurry screen shake. You can tone it down and make it kind of a soft rumble. You can do a lot of things to make that kind of concept a lot subtler. I think the amount of games that like could use some amount of screen shake, probably more subtle than this, is a ton. And I'm personally a huge fan of it, but it comes in all shapes and sizes. And of course, like you said, not relevant for all games. Like there are some games where you don't need it. But
I would encourage people to, like, if this is like novel to you and like you haven't made a game with screen shake before, I would encourage you to like go ham and make too much screen shake so you can feel what it's like and like
That's
dial it back.
I'm
But like it's an important lesson to learn to do too much.
I'm so glad you said that way because it's like that is like super true. Like it is like for all of this, like I typically like get the question, how much juice is too much juice? And it's like I answer that with like I've never seen a game that has too much juice, but I have seen games that have too much juice on the wrong thing, right? If you get the importance of your actions wrong and really emphasize, this is like Super Smash Bros. Makes me upset with this sometimes. I like the game, but like every once in a while, there's something in Super Smash Bros. That looks super powerful and doesn't do that much damage. This got a lot better in Ultimate, but in 4, it drove me insane. But like it, yeah, there's you can be juicing the wrong things. It's very hard sometimes to like actually put too much juice if you understand your game and are juicing the right thing. So just like a super important thing to like just try to like, yeah, go ham, like what I was saying, and just like do what you think is too much. It will often be even then not enough, and you need to add more stuff. Yeah.
I have another example of too much juice in the wrong place. I can't think of what the game was specifically. I want to say it was like Deus Ex Human Revolution, where like you open up your map and it does this really cool visual effect, like and like the map opens up and like kind of like comes alive. But it takes like a full second and a half, maybe just a full second for this animation to play out. And I get lost really easily, so I tend to like walk 5 steps and open up my map, and then turn around and then walk 5 steps and open up my map again. And having that every time, it got old.
Right. An example of that done really well is in one of the greatest games of all time, Hollow Knight, where opening the map, like you can still see your character in the background. And you can like see the character like look down at the map, and like it's still this cool, and the map just kind of like fades in real quick, and there's a dedicated button for it, and it's still this like cool interaction for the map, which is a very important element in Hollow Knight, like looking at the map. And they just like made it very subtle, but like, you know, like the character looks, the screen fades, and the map appears like all at once. Right? There was like someone spent like a couple hours like working on all these things, right? Like it is important to like actually sit down and look at that kind of stuff, that even though when it like feels small. But yeah, don't overdo it to the extent where it's like hard to play. But it's sometimes it's hard to get it so much that it's hard to play. All right. So now let's go back to the beginning, where this whole presentation began. This is the original game. It is slow. It's floaty. It takes forever to take out an enemy. I don't even know if my bullets are working at first. Like, is that how you take out an enemy? Is like just shooting them work? Like, what's going on? I get stuck on stuff all the time. It's just not fun. And then we turned it into this, and we did 9 like pretty simple little things to the game. When I was making this presentation the very first time, it's a different story now because I've like overhauled it a couple times, but the very first time I made this presentation, I spent 3 hours making the base game and 3 more hours adding the juice. It's like wasn't that much time, but it like really does like a lot to like make this game feel interesting, feel dynamic, and like makes me like want to play. It makes me interested in what's going on the screen. And yeah, that's kind of that's the thing. Thanks for watching. Open for questions now if anyone has more stuff to talk about. Like I said, I have like a million examples and good things to talk about related to this kind of stuff. If you want to talk about other games and or like how this applies to them, like Brennan's bringing up that it doubled my development time. I do want to talk about that. Yeah, so 3 hours to make the game, 3 hours adding juice. It did double my development time, and like that's that is like the sad reality of this, is that this stuff, like, it does take time. Like, it's all fairly simple, but it's like it's an iterative process to like add all these things. And it's like what's really interesting about game development, right? Like, is that like these things don't exist. Like, obviously a lot of these things come from animation principles. Like, they're not special in that way. But a lot of these things don't really exist in like the gameplay implications and stuff. Like, don't really exist outside of that. And it's like this is what's really worth doing and what's really fun in a game. And typically it wouldn't just double the development time, it would probably like quintuple it at least. I turned this game at one point into a different, like, more advanced, like, prototype for a different game that I had never finished. And like I spent like a month just like adding all of these details and feelings and tiny things. And like I got another month and I'm like, I feel like nothing changed. But then I played the game and I was like, oh, this is fun for me. Like, it wasn't really fun at the beginning of this, and now it is like really fun. And so really, like, yeah, adding these little things, the little things is what's going to take forever, but like those things are tangible, right? I've tied a lot of this back to like principles, and like it has a lot to do with how the human brain works. Like, it's not just guessing and fiddling around forever. Like, these are things you can kind of like, it is a lot of fiddling around, but like these are things that you can make educated guesses about and like attempt like with some amount of certainty.
I was gonna say that like, because the way, like, the hierarchy of like, oh, 3 hours to make the game, 3 hours to make the juice, that implies that these were separate steps. And like, for me at least, like I tend to like polish as I go. That, like, there's a consequence of that. That if, like, especially in a game jam, it's like, that if I build a menu system and then I also like make the menu system all polished and animated and stuff like that, and then I decide, oh, actually I'm not going to use this, then like, it's a lot more of investment to throw away. But like, it's as you build this skill and as you get used to like whatever tooling you have available in your engine of choice to make this happen, there's lots of libraries that make a lot of this stuff easier. Like, it can be pretty easy to like have something move from point A to point B linearly. Like, if you just want to have just something move across the screen, like we're like your button example earlier, and if it can move linearly, you could probably have it move at some other curve as well pretty easily. And you could, like, that little things like that you can get really fast iteration time on. Of just like, I want this thing to move and I want it to move at this curve, and like, there, done.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the 3 in 3 hours thing for me, like, for this was because that was necessary to make this presentation.
Right.
But like, totally true that like while making a game normally, it would be a lot of, and I find that's how I work best, is just like copying kind of back and forth between all these like little things on it, just to like, something feels off, what can I do to make this more fun, and constantly asking myself that question until it's way more fun.
I have a question about your process regarding polishing.
Yeah.
So I know, like, there's a really common notion that in game development we should use an iterative process. Like, we first build a bare bones prototype to verify that the gameplay is like fun. But like, as you just demonstrated, sometimes it's not the lack of gameplay that makes something not fun, but the lack of juice. But we also know that adding in juice takes a lot of upfront time. So we might not be able to get it into like a core prototype for our first playtest. So how do we tell if during a playtest if what we're lacking is juice, or if it's something more foundational, like not good game mechanics?
Yeah, I love this question. What I would say here is that juice is that more foundational thing. And if you have, especially when you have, like, if you're in a game jam, or if you're making something for a class, or just are putting a personal deadline on yourself, and you have some sort of deadline, and you want to say like, okay, how much time, like I'm spending, X amount of time on this, and in that time I want to be able to like build all the mechanics. Oh, but I won't be able to juice it, so it'll be unclear whether or not it's fun at the end. My argument for you would be take the scope of your game, right? Shrink it by, I mean, Secure said in the chat, 20% dev time, 80% juice time, right? So if you think it's going to take you 100% of the time to make all the game mechanics, like make a game that's 20% as big as that game and also add the juice. Make that part of your prototype. Because like it does change things, right? Like this is a very different game, and like mechanically it might be like the number of enemies here might be important because of balance or whatever, but like just kind of on a whim because of how powerful I wanted the bullets to feel, I like changed the enemy health from 7 to 2, right? Like, and that's part of the juice process, right? So like these things really like kind of like Wyatt was saying too, like these things like can't really be removed from each other, and I would say like as much as possible, like try to make try to make the juice part of your like core prototyping process, and there will obviously not be as much as a finished game, right? But like try to find some of that important stuff, especially if it's an action game. If it's an action game, then the juice is really important. And that is like that's what I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just trying to distinguish like what kind of polish should be saved for later and what kind is necessary for a
Right.
proof of concept thing.
And that's a kind of I don't know if I can give that answer like generically, but I would like if you're looking at something and you're like, this doesn't feel exciting to me, and like some part of like some game you're working on, you're like, this doesn't feel exciting to me. Like for my personal sake, when I see that, I make it feel more exciting, because if I don't, I might get less excited about the entire game. Like if I just keep working on systems, I'm gonna like at some point be like, this game sucks, regardless of whether or not it does, because I'm just like so caught up in the fact that it's missing all these like little frills and things. If that makes sense.
So
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question piggybacking off of that. So we talk about this word polish, and the way I've learned that to mean is that like polish is inherently unnecessary. Like it doesn't impact gameplay. It just like makes the game look better. But it sounds like juice is maybe not quite the same thing, or maybe kind of straddles the line between polish and gameplay. Or are these all words made up and like nothing matters?
Yeah, that's just. I would agree generally with that. I do think it's all kind of made up. I would also say that like polish impacts the gameplay, even if it doesn't impact the gameplay. Polish impacts the gameplay. The classic example is I think wow, a lot of Wii game examples here, but I think it was the Wolfenstein game for the Wii. They were or like around that era, between the like old Wolfenstein games and the new one. They were working on this Wolfenstein game and they were beta testing it, and there was this one gun that was like not performing well. And they're like, why is this gun like doing so badly, right? They were looking at the stats of people who were playing with it, and it's like, this gun sucks. Like, and so they went to the gameplay programmers and they said, fix this gun, it's bugged.
I know where this is going.
Yeah, and the gameplay programmers looked and they put it next to another gun. They're like, these two guns are the same. And like the like mechanically they should work exactly the same, but one's not working quite as well as the other. And the guy like found the sound effect for the gun that was underperforming, boosted the bass on it, and returned and sent the new copy out, and everyone's like, oh great, you fixed the gun, it's great, it's working now, people, it's a better gun now, people are playing with it better. Like juice is polish is mechanics. It's it's really hard to separate them from each other. And like that's just kind of like the truth of it. So I would say don't shy away from polishing things that you're working on for a prototype. And like obviously some things won't be able to make it into the prototype, but like do try to polish / juice things that are important, because that like that will go back and it will change the identity of the mechanics, even if it doesn't literally change the identity of mechanics.
Yeah, I guess one question I would have is regarding like board games because like a lot of board games they don't have that same kind of polish. Like in real life, you just move pieces around, but like even in video games, like a video game version of chess, usually it's just you move the piece and it just moves linearly along to the next cell,
Right. So, well,
and
some
like it's still really fun to play, even though it's just mechanics without much juice around it.
yeah, for sure. And it's like I think this kind of thing can like add a lot of excitement, but like it's not needed for the game to be interesting. I'll also mention that like board games. I don't know if there are people here that are like designing board games or excited about designing board games. Definitely not my wheelhouse, but there are things in board games sometimes that super cleverly are juice and they let it drive the design. Like the way you have to move cards around sometimes is like an important part of it. Like if you have a point where it's like, okay, these things are on cards and you put them face down and then reveal, that's an exciting action to take. Like putting a card out in front of you and flipping it over at the same time as someone else is an exciting action to take. And you can kind of like tweak these things and like style them in a way such that people like actually are kind of like forced to play the board game in a certain way, and like that is juice. It's like it's a far cry from what I talked about today, but like there is that kind of concept I think in board games as well, in terms of like how the actual actions work.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just agreeing.
Oh, I was gonna say, so like I think you have an interesting example because I think what you're getting at is that like you could make a chess game with no juice whatsoever and it's still fun because like something about chess is just intrinsically fun to people. So like there's this you're seeing this disconnect of like sometimes you need juice for the game to be fun and other times you don't, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that being said, I'd be way more excited about playing your chess game if the screen shakes a lot when I kill your queen, right? Like,
But I think that with
or if the pieces animate, right? Like,
yeah,
that's like a little thing. Like, you look at like in Windows Vista, Microsoft like made chess 3D and like had the little animations in there, and like the board spins back and forth based on the player's turn. And it's like none of that is needed for chess, but it's like it's exciting. It like draws people in. It makes people excited about the game.
but like I think with like I'm trying to think of like how to frame this because I do think there's an interesting point in there that I think with a game like chess, you don't need to sell people on why it's fun. If they're like if they're already familiar with chess, like they already understand that like the fun part of chess is the part that happens in your brain when you're looking at a board. Like and that is static. Like you're just looking at a chessboard in real life and like to people who enjoy chess, like that's the fun part of the game.
Well, one element of one detail about chess is that it was also around long before video games were a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to market chess, I think is kind of what you're both getting at.
Yeah. Then like you can sell someone on chess with no polish because they already like chess, and like if you're providing them chess with no polish, you're just like this is just you know the service is I provided you a chessboard so you can play this game you already like.
Right. Whereas if you look at a game like Hive, I don't know if anyone's played the board game Hive, it's similar to chess in that it's a perfect information 1v1 like take down the queen scenario, but it has to sell itself, so it has these big chunky like thick heavy beautiful tiles that they like sell with the game because like it's kind of got to sell itself. Chess doesn't have to sell itself. People will go out and buy $5 chess sets all the time because they just want to be able to play chess.
Although some people in the no mic chat are making a really good point that like in a physical chessboard, the like texture and weight of the pieces can make a difference. Like you could play chess with like plastic pieces or
Yep.
like with like buttons from your mom's sewing kit. But like having like really nice, glass pieces that like when they hit the board, they have that satisfying like tink, like, that's juice, that's polish, like,
Yep.
but in board game form. So I guess like that, like, it's a different thing for sure than like what you talked about here, but like it is that same sort of like that sensory input when you play the game.
Yeah.
with like with chess in particular, and other similar board games, I'm pretty sure this happens in Go too. If you place a piece confidently, then it's fundamentally different from like waiting a couple seconds and then like making a move almost reluctantly. And so
Yeah.
you have different
There's
kinds of
like
things. Yeah, they're like juice. They matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is it would be hard to replicate that kind of board game juice that we're talking about in a video game.
Yes, but not as hard as you would think, right? Like one of the, I don't remember if I said it in this iteration, but one of the things about the jump, even in just this change of the jump, is like the jump feels weightier. Like this blue box feels heavier than it did before. And like that's like, I mean, that's physics, right? Like, and like heavier, chunkier physics and like things like that. Like that does reflect the same kind of in real life and in games. So I would argue it is. I mean, a lot of it not, like the confidence and stuff not, but like some of it is kind of similar.
Although, since we're on the thought experiment of like a digital chess game that like tries to mimic the feeling of playing real chess, like if you are like, the providing that like if you're interacting with it digitally, like you might be like physically selecting a piece and like considering a move, and then like you cancel out and select a different piece, like similar to like, if in like sitting at a table, you might like reach for the knight and you're like, no, actually no, I want to move the rook instead. Like you can like express that part of it digitally, but yeah, you're right, it's like the physically moving the piece, like I think this is the right move. Yeah, like that because that happens automatically, you can't like, the game can't predict how you're feeling and project your feelings onto the game.
Right. Or it's at least easier to hide it. This is a pretty deep thought experiment on this specific thing. Any other questions about juice in games, juice in video games, or this presentation, or specific things we talked about related to this? Specific games that you wonder why they did something or didn't do something.
This is oh, you can go ahead actually. I saw someone had unmuted. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I keep forgetting I have push talk on. Yeah, I was actually going to ask about audio, but that's probably a whole nother dimension, I imagine.
Absolutely. I'm also much worse at it.
Okay.
So I don't have as much to talk about. A lot of audio does go back to sort of where's the slide? Or when I think about audio, I think a lot about this slide, right? In terms of like, okay, those things that are happening all the time need to be as unnoticeable as possible, right? So like shooting should be kind of unnoticeable. Like it should still be like your gun should still go when you shoot, right? Like it should make a noise that's powerful because shooting a gun's powerful. But like hitting an enemy needs to like, if you're constantly shooting and you hit an enemy, that noise needs to kind of cut through the other noise. And if an enemy dies, that noise kind of needs to cut through the enemies being hit, right? And there are a lot of fancy things you can do to like literally change levels of things dynamically. I'm not good at doing any of that. But like,
did you have any specific questions that we might be able to try to answer? Lunacy? You're muted.
Oh, for audio. Oh no, I was Not really. I was just wondering if there were any general pointers. I guess it depends.
Yeah, I think a lot of the concepts still apply, but it's something that I am less good at, and so I don't feel as confident talking about it. There are a whole, I don't know, I know people who have like gone to school for like game audio and like know all these incredible things, and I'm just like I have no idea. But
I can like I'd say I'm like okay at game audio, and like one of the things that's really worked for me is like playing your game with headphones for one thing. I mean, and you should test it, like see how it feels with any kind of audio peripheral, but playing it with headphones with the volume turned a little bit too high, because like it helps you notice like what sounds are like way louder than other sounds. Like to Andrew's point, like the relative volume of things definitely matters, uh, and it like helps you notice like, wow, like whenever I shoot, like all I can hear is the gun shooting sound, and like the shooting the gun is louder than when I hit like sound when I hit the enemies, or like, I mean, maybe not louder but more noticeable. It's like, is that right? Do I want that? Like, uh, and like it's, I don't know if I have the answers, but like that helps you find the questions, I guess, if you just like play with your sound cranked up. Don't go deaf.
Okay, thanks.
I had an observation when I was watching the trailer for this little indie game called Super Mario Odyssey. You may have heard of. I think it was on the Switch. And I remember watching that trailer, and there was one scene, like one like 3-second clip from the trailer where Mario like picks up a bunch of purple coins, and I just thought it was so odd. He like collides with the coin, and the coin vanishes, and a little like tring like plays, and like that's it. Like there. It felt like there should have been like a particle or something like the game, just game object dot destroy. Like it just vanished out of existence.
yeah, I think some of that is. I think Nintendo feels a bit tied to that. They're working with like this legacy where it's like that's kind of what coins do. But especially the purple ones, right? Because the purple ones are important. Like
Yeah,
they should do a little bit more. Like, and that's one of the things I love that game. That's like my favorite game of all time. And when I was playing it, I didn't get all the purple coins, and that's actually the one moon in the game I don't have is the moon you get from buying all the souvenirs, which you get from getting all the purple coins. Because I was basically like getting purple coins, whatever. Like versus like getting all the other moons was like exciting, flashy, normally like an interesting puzzle. Those were kind of just like hidden everywhere. I was kind of like, I can miss it, And maybe that was because of the juice on them. It's not as exciting.
yeah. Like I did notice when I actually played the game, because it's something that stood out to me in the trailer, and and my immediate thought was, this is a slightly early version of the game, and like that's just one of the things they didn't get to in time for the trailer. And then like in playing it, what I noticed is that there is actually a very, very tiny particle effect,
Yeah, there's like some little purple mist that happens after
Yeah.
it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And like maybe there's a lesson there of like you can be super subtle with this, and like something that like is only there if you look for it. I wouldn't know. I don't know if you should go that subtle, but
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's like we were saying before, like add way more than you think you need.
Chow says in the no make chat that there's too much juice on the "You Got a Moon" animation.
Oh, I love it. I don't know. I got like 830 or whatever moons. It was doing something to my brain. It made the good juices go in my brain. I kept wanting to see it, so I kept playing that game.
I think it's fine considering what it could have been, Because like they sometimes do like a really long like animation where like you and Cappy do a little dance and then
Yes.
like freeze frame and like all that.
They decided to shorten it from previous games, which was the right choice, and I think it's I personally really like it, but also like that is my favorite game, so I'm biased. And sometimes it does get really annoying when you're collecting. There's a portion of the game where you get moons really fast, and it's like, okay, I'm done. Like, there are way too many.
People are trickling out.
People are trickling out.
The Mario Odyssey talk is driving people away.
Yeah, people don't like Mario Odyssey.
We're sort of in like the post-meeting chat at this point. I will say, like, while I'm speaking, I guess that I always appreciate this talk just because I like to see how like just very tiny iterations can rapidly turn like a very basic game, which is basically like the tutorial talk, right? Like the tutorial creates a game looking like iteration 0, and then with like 9 tiny little scripts, which are all like, most of them are just like literally like 10 lines of code at most.
Mm-hmm.
You just turn it into something actually like that you can just idly play and like be entertained by. So I think it's always a good talk to have, especially after a tutorial.
And hopefully it gets people really excited for their jam, right?
It's perfect for the jam. It's like, how can you cheaply and efficiently create the most bang for your buck?
Right.
Like,
Take the thing you already know how to do.
Yes.
Make it a little bit more